Hello, this is Fam Electric Ghost.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And so I just do a little intro. This is the Fam Electric Ghost Show. We talk to indie artists from around the world. And today we're talking to Teddy. You're from New York.
I am, yeah. Well, originally from Seattle and then Austin, Texas, but now I'm in Brooklyn.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I sent you the questions. So we'll kind of run through those and then we get into, we talk about what artists want to talk about. So we talk about your process and your music and how you got into it. So the first question I usually ask is like, when did you first get into music and at what age?
Okay, yeah. I mean, man, that's like a I feel like music has always been super prominent in my life, mostly because I did grow up in a small town, so everyone had cars, and I think a lot of growing up, especially in high school, is that you are kind of really into like playing music with your friends in cars. And so even though I was part of the iPod age, we still burned CDs because everyone's cars had CD players. And I think I really got into music because I wanted to make dope playlists and like, take them to parties. And, I got a lot of satisfaction out of that. Getting into like as a musician came about actually like 3 years ago when I was palling around with an artist. His name's Elliot Lip, and he pretty much taught me everything. And I got really excited about music. He put Ableton on my computer, and it just kind of skyrocketed from there, I guess.
That's interesting. So you've been working on music like for your own, um, artistic enterprise for the last like 3 years, but you were into it when you were in high school.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think any musician is going to tell you that they've always just had an interest in music, an interest in being more involved than their peers in music. And, at first it started off as me more or less being like a curator for parties for my friends, just for my own personal enjoyment. That was back in the day when, LimeWire was super big, and, we'd pull a shit ton of playlists off there and just like make music and share music. And I thought that was really cool. And then later in life, when the opportunity arose to actually becoming a musician, I was chomping at the bit, so I just grabbed it.
So you realized, when do you realize you had a talent as a musician, and maybe get into like what kind of musician, what, or if you're a producer and you just use digital audio workstations and CDJs, just maybe talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as like my DAW, I use Ableton for sure. If I'm playing live, I definitely use CDJs. I think that's pretty much the streamlined way of playing, especially EDM. I know a lot of people like to use like a MIDI, or they'll use their laptop still with Serato, but I prefer just having a thumb drive and being able to take that over to wherever I'm playing. It's, a lot better than having to cart around a lot of gear, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But yeah, I mostly work in Ableton. I use a lot of VSTs. I use a lot of plugins. I do have a couple keyboards that I like to use specifically. I really like the R3 by Korg. It's just a really basic, really good keyboard. It has a vocoder on it, which I really like. So I'll plug that in and I'll use that as a MIDI keyboard by itself as well.
That's interesting because I'm a kind of a analog modular,
I'm so
straight like electronic musician. The type of music I use are modular synths and analog synths like Moogs and
uh
Rolands and
Yeah,
Eurorack.
I mean, I predominantly like to produce like in software mostly. Like I really enjoy using what Ableton has to offer. I really enjoy VST's plugins. I really, for my workstation, I just like to use an interface, one hard like one keyboard, and then my computer.
Yeah, it's a different style. I mean, I grew up in the '70s. I'm like a 50-year-old musician,
Oh yeah, for
so
sure.
it's
And
a different age now.
yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah,
And I mean, I'm like all about gear. I think gear is really fucking cool, but I mean, it's super expensive and it takes up a lot of space. So I'm trying to keep my studio space as minimal as possible. And I think that way I don't get too sidetracked or, carried away. It's just nice to have like a minimal workstation. But, that's what works for me. I have a roommate who's also a musician, and he has like a full studio of like everything analog, which is also really dope because I'll go in there and play around. But for my personal workspace, I like to keep it pretty minimal.
It's a different age because I come from an age where people were using
Oh
like
yeah, oh
Roland
yeah.
Junos and Jupiters and Moog and stuff, and I'm a straight keyboardist, so I like to
Oh, of
actually
course,
build
yeah.
sounds. And so it's a different type of like electronic musicians who do like synth wave.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at bands like Radiohead or
Yeah,
Yes, that's
totally.
kind of where I'm coming from. It's a totally different space. So it's like listening to the analog synths. We're kind of like guitar players. Guitar players are big into their guitars, and synth
Oh
players are
god, yeah,
big
we
into
love
their hardware.
it.
But
But
yeah, so your influences and musicians that you look up
my
to as your reference points.
I'd probably say like a lot of my influence comes from other electronic music producers like RL Grime, Hudson Mohawk, Bauer. Those guys are pretty inspirational to me. There's a couple up and coming women well, I'd probably say that they've definitely arrived, but like Rez, and there's this girl named Whipped Cream. She's really good. She makes bass music, and there's a lot of people that I draw influence from, but I would definitely say like my biggest influences are RL Grime, Bauer, and Hudson Mohawk for sure.
So more artists in the
Yeah,
two
yeah, for
thousands.
sure. Mostly because I've only been making music for about 3 years, and so that's like what really inspired me are those three artists predominantly, just because they use a lot of horns. They have really interesting drum patterns, and I kind of fell in love with it. And I was like, I want to figure out how to make music like that. And I kind of just went online and started doing YouTube tutorials and trying to figure out my own sound. But they're definitely influenced my musical patterns for sure.
So so you said you use Serato and you use CDJs, use
Oh, I
your
use
DAW again,
Ableton 10. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ableton Live. So so when you play live, you use like Ableton Live or you use your Ableton
I
10?
don't use Ableton Live. I just use CDJs. So what I'll do is I'll take a thumb drive and I'll actually run it through a program called Record Box, and that'll pretty much put the key
Mm-hmm.
signature on it, the BPM, and then the CDJs recognize that, and so I'll put in one thumb drive, and that'll pretty much load up all my tracks. So that way I can kind of plan out my set if I'm going to do open format, or if it's like a set where I have a plan, I can pretty much have my set list in there so I can pull songs from it and then live mix them and whatever.
So you would say you're more of an EDM
Yeah,
DJ type of artist?
100%. Yeah, that's kind of what I've filtered myself into.
That's cool. So have you looked at doing any kind of things that are outside
Yeah, I've
EDM, other
definitely thought
genres?
about it. I'm learning how to play the piano now, which is a lot different. A lot of people think because I make music that I automatically know how to play the piano, which isn't true.
Yeah.
It's definitely a skill that I've been working on. It's a skill that's going to take me a couple of years to really learn, but I've been trying to get outside of my comfort zone and trying to learn the piano. And we have a full-size piano in our apartment, so I've been working, you know.
It's a good tool. But like if you look at the history of electronic music, if you go back to when like Moog and
Mm-hmm.
Roland created their first synthesizers, they actually didn't use keyboards.
Oh
They
yeah.
used sequencers. So the early electronic musicians used analog controlled voltage sequencers, which are kind of like the sequencers
Mm-hmm.
today, but they're a little bit different in that they just triggered 16 steps, but you had to run them through all these different
Right, right.
synthesizer concepts, and running through like controlled voltage, running through subtractive synthesis and additive synthesis. So those are like theories on how you build sounds rather
Right.
than just building beats. And if you like, a cool thing to get into is like Euro racks, and because they can create very unique sounds that you can't get from soft synths. You can build sounds
Yeah,
from
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
waveform,
absolutely.
and and you can actually create music without even know how to play a keyboard, you can do all the sound designs, very atmospheric, and can do a lot of cool things that you can integrate
for sure.
into EDM.
Which is definitely like what
Yeah.
I want to be able to expand on for sure. I think that always looking for inspiration and always looking for something different is super important to not, get stagnant.
And a cool device that's very small, that's kind of real hip right now, is
Oh
if you
yeah,
ever
like
heard
the
of Teenage
OP1.
Engineering. Yeah, I have an OPZ.
Oh.
And I just did a whole record on an OPZ. And the OPZ is just is a 16-step sequencer, but it's got sound engines inside of it, and it can do lighting. It can do all kinds of lighting effects at a show. It can do video effects, and it's very small. It just looks like a TV remote. But you can build a whole song on it. It's very small, and it uses USB MIDI. So that combined with the CDJ would allow you to do some performance things on a hardware synth that's super small.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely something that I want to get into. I think I've just been like super preoccupied with just learning the basics.
Yeah, but things like OP1s and OPZs are kind of cool because then they allow DJs to kind of start to bring some traditional hardware synthesis
for sure.
into
and I
the
think
picture.
That's something that's definitely missing, especially DJs that play festivals. I mean, I know tons of people that bring keyboards, that play guitar, that do a bunch of that stuff, but predominantly I feel like people in my genre usually just bring a thumb drive, use the CDJs, but there's definitely skill involved in that. But to see some more hardware out there would be kind of cool. Definitely cool.
Yeah, just because I come from a kind of tradition of electronic musicians that we actually play. If you ever see my Instagram, I actually do shows where I'm playing hardware synths, and you see bands like Radiohead and Wilco and Mogwai. There are bands that still do that. Churches is a good example of a synthwave band kind of bringing new wave
for sure.
And part of electronic is going back to the 80s and that new wave sound, or like that sound that Kraftwerk came up with, or Human League, bands like that. That electronic music is multiple genres, and some people sometimes think, like I was actually approached, and I'm a synthesizer player, and I was approached as like, oh, can you do something on a CDJ? But for a guy like me, putting a Moog on a CDJ isn't really what I would do.
That makes sense.
But I can understand, because I've talked to several DJs, like Skeleton out of Los Angeles, and DJ Linata. I interviewed her, and it's just interesting in this genre that there's a lot of cool stuff going on. But I'm always looking for people to expand, because I know what happened to disco. And if everybody gets so comfortable with a way that's very easy to perform, but then limiting in terms of creative capability, then you could kind of get caught into a disco scenario if people don't bring other things into the genre.
I definitely would love to see some more hardware out there. I mean, some of my favorite shows that I've gone to have been DJs that bring out their keyboards, or like something like a Rolly or something, like they have and those there's usually like a huge separation between DJs that use CDJs and people that perform with hardware. And I definitely think that people have a tendency to get boxed in. It would be really cool to see that switch up a little bit, for sure.
But I've seen that more in Europe. Like if you go to Asia and Europe, or you go to like Netherlands and Norway, Australia, there's a lot of synthwave bands that are merging CDJs with live drummers, live guitar players,
I've definitely
people with big Euro racks. And that's a different thing, because then you actually have a lot more gear, and you're more like a band. It's harder. It's harder to manage, and then you got to get roadies and stuff like that, because you're carrying a lot more stuff. So I can understand trying to have the small footprint, but there are things out there like the Roland Keytar. I was out of production for 20 years, and now the Keytar is back. Roland's making full Keytars. They have like 1,300 sounds in them, and then you can play them live, and that's a cool kind of way to connect to an audience, because then you have an electronic musician that has something that's kind of like a guitar, but it allows you to get in front of the audience and kind of get out behind a stack and actually interact like the way a guitar player interacts. And so that's another way of getting into your audience, and doing stuff. But there's all kinds of stagecraft. People wear stuff, like Dead Mouse, but Dead Mouse is a DJ. He uses a lot of analog. He uses a lot of Eurorack, which a lot of people might not realize, but
Yeah,
there's a
I
lot
mean,
of
I
that
think
going
that's
on
just
in his
also a
stuff.
difference between people and like what they do in the studio versus what they do live. Like I know that predominantly like my music it's all made, the creativity and like the production is in the studio for sure, and there's countless hours where you're doing that, and then there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes and that, and so by the time I'm ready to get in, and sometimes I'll even work on stuff in someone else's studio, so there's not really an opportunity to bring that hardware on stage, but there's definitely like, especially the bigger artists, I know that they have access to some of the best gear like in the world. So
Yeah, it's just harder because there's a whole thing going on where clubs like to run people in, a lot more acts in one night. I've been to clubs in New York with, they want to have 10, 15, 20 acts, and you can't bring like a traditional rock band. It's hard to change up that many bands. But if you're on CDJs, you have more capability to have
yeah,
more people in the club
yeah, for sure. I
playing
mean,
that night.
it's just easy, it's really cool that you can just show up with a thumb drive and do your sound check, and it's definitely become
Yeah.
something.
If you have to jump on a plane, you don't have to bring your road
No,
cage.
no, and I've traveled with vinyl before, and I think my shoulder is like permanently like, I don't know, lower than the other one because I was carrying a
Yeah.
vinyl bag, and that shit is
Yeah.
heavy.
Well, I've heard there are some clubs that are kind of rebelling and wanting
Yeah.
people to bring vinyl again. There's some clubs that just want
Oh yeah, I mean,
guys
all
on
vinyl
vinyl,
sets are
and
are are so cool. I mean, I love it when I'm going someplace and someone's actually playing vinyl, because it's just like, you don't see that everywhere.
yeah,
Like you see it, but you
yeah,
don't see it everywhere, and I mean, that's
yeah. Because the different kind of skips that kind of it comes into play. The vinyl, I think it's kind of similar to like, there's different things. People on CDJs like Yeji, she's really big. She does really interesting mixes and stuff on stage, and so I've seen really creative DJs, and so I think there's a lot of room in the genre for doing some really cool stuff. Um, but again, I'm a very performance oriented type of
right.
artist. But I interview people in multiple genres, and I understand there's a lot of creativity in the studio. So maybe about there's those songs on your SoundCloud, Heart Slice and Diamonds. Maybe you can talk about how you
I'm
constructed
sorry,
those.
you broke up just a little bit.
I was talking about some of the
Oh, right.
songs on your SoundCloud. So I see
Mm-hmm.
Hot Slice and Diamonds. Maybe you can talk about how you
Yeah, I
put
mean,
those
those
songs
songs
together.
are some of those are definitely like my babies. It's my first EP. So basically, like I said earlier, like I got Ableton on my computer, and I first just kind of started messing around with just like samples of classical music, which I've always loved classical music. I grew up on it. My parents listened to it, and then I started, putting in a drum rack in Ableton, and I started just kind of fooling around with that. And then, you can plug in MIDI notes, and I learned how to make chords. And it just kind of, I found a vocal sample that I really liked, and I started chopping that, and it just kind of came together. It wasn't the most organic process because I was learning at the same time. So it took me a really long time. Like I learned how to produce with those songs essentially. And when they first started, they were completely different. They were just a couple loops strung together with like a weird drum rack. And then, the more I learned, the more I could alter it. And, it just, those songs I pretty much learned on, and, that's why I love them so much. But,
So did you do all the production on those, or did you take them to a producer? Did you
oh, I
do
did. I
everything?
did all of the production on that. Yeah. I did have a couple people help me with the mix and mastering process, because I think that that's just like such a monster to get into,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're a new producer. That I definitely wanted other people's help with that.
Okay.
I think that's really important, especially as a new artist, to always ask for help. But yeah, I produce all those pretty much predominantly by myself. Yeah.
That's awesome, because I've seen some people that they'll do basic tracks, like in it in FL Studio, and then the producer does significant like rewrite. But that's what what you feel comfortable. Some artists want that kind of person to do that, and then other artists want their own personal stamp on their work. So it's kind of like the singer-songwriter from the 70s would do pretty much the whole thing, and then the producers did very minimal. And so it seems like you're going more like the route of a singer-songwriter producer.
I like to do everything by myself. I want to do my drums by myself. I want to do my chords by myself. I'll grab samples off of places like Splice or some MP3s online, just whatever I can find, like some Foley or some sounds online, and I'll mix them in there for sure. But I mean, I like to get in there and make everything myself because it is my art, and it's important that I do that. But as far as mixing and mastering, that's really when I like to hand it off. I'm just not quite there yet. I know I'm not there yet, and to give my art its best chance, I like to have other people help me mix and master.
I mean, it depends on how crazy you go with some of the mastering hardware, then it makes it easier.
And some people have like really good hardware and software that I don't have that they can mix and master with. So there's always that.
You have the analog mixers or the digital mixers, and all the different things you can do to like once you put your tracks down, then there's a lot of cool stuff you can do today in home studios. So I've built one up over the last 20 years, kind of like leaning toward analog sound. But there's a lot of people there's a lot of people that have these digital studios, and somewhat like, okay, but if you're an analog artist, you don't really want your stuff getting compressed into digital when you're using analog.
Yeah, for sure. And
so it depends on what you're doing. So, but you're in the space where you're a digital artist. That's not a big issue. But for people who are doing like analog, then sometimes people who are offering services, they kind of can actually.
It's definitely like
it's not really geared toward what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've used some
different people.
I'm sorry.
No, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I think we had lost connection just a little bit.
I hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah. I mean, analog for sure and digital, they definitely go together. I mean, I even have in Diamonds the Hoover. I put the Hoover in there for a split second, which I really liked. Kind of like an ode to 90s electro. I really like that sound. It's really aggressive, but it's such a dope sound that I felt like I had to include it.
Yeah, it's kind of like I have a big love of punk music, and some electronic music. I like to bring in like the Clash and bring in like really the Ramones and that kind of punk aesthetic, and that can be a little messy because punk didn't really go for like the most aesthetic, pristine sound.
It's not very emotion. Punk isn't the most melodic of music, but it's just got so much fucking energy. It's just got that that drive.
The punk aesthetic of the Clash. They're not singing in perfect pitch, but they've got something to say with like this urgency, then this kind of power that you can you can bring that in. You get bands like 9 Inch Nails. They kind of took this punk aesthetic into electronic, and they had that. Trent Reznor had that kind of same punk attack that the Clash had, but it was kind of do that like where I'm, but anybody who takes a little harder stuff, I'm always like,
there's always also like something like, especially if I'm going to do something that's really hard, I always like to add something that's like really pretty or like really melodic, and I like balance in my tracks. I think that's really important, at least to me. Like, I don't want like a fully like hard bass song or like a super like absolutely cute future bass song. So I like to sit somewhere in the middle. I'm a huge fan of balance in tracks.
Yeah, I think like we go back to the old school, like really old schools, like
Yeah.
Beatle-esque,
Yeah.
songwriting. It was kind of about having a balanced
Mm-hmm.
record. They had a lot of different emotions, a lot of different feels. Like back in the age where people would
Mm-hmm.
listen to an album, like
Yeah.
album-oriented music, where like all the songs could be different, but
Right.
feelings on each one. So it's kind of where from that kind of idea that the Beatles started with songcraft, that people would listen
Mm-hmm.
to a whole record. Because prior to them, people just
Yeah,
listened to singles.
for sure. And
Then they started creating the album as a.
yeah, that's like something that's happening now too, I think, is that people are just like releasing music as singles, as EPs, and you definitely still see albums, but I'm seeing a lot of people just like releasing singles, like all over the place, and I really like that. I like that a lot because it's like you don't there's like there's like no rules in
Yeah, today's kind of like there's like early in the 50s stuff, but again, a band like James Brown. James Brown would be releasing like a single every week.
mm-hmm.
It was like all the time. It weren't even really albums, it's singles all the time. And I think today we've kind of gone back to that,
Yeah.
where a lot of artists are kind of going back to doing what the 50s like soul bands used to do. They used to release like all the time. And eventually they started getting collected onto albums, like vinyl LPs. But
Right.
originally they were all like 78s and 45s. Of the world are like, the radio stations back then, they were just releasing like singles all the time.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Are you working on just singles, or you have like an album project for 2019?
For 2019, I'm working on a 4-song EP, another one that pretty much highlights what I've learned over the last year. It's a little bit more technical. There's a lot more sound design involved. I'm just kind of being more authentic and trying really hard to, I had the luxury of being able to release my music while still learning. So, it's definitely like every single EP that I'm going to start releasing is just going to be like another part of that learning process. And I think that the sound design is going to be a little bit trickier in this next upcoming project. And it's definitely going to be a lot darker. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I
So
like that.
I'm excited. I mean, it's definitely still has those like that like cute poppiness to it, but it's there's a lot of bass sounds that I really really like, and they're dark and they
Mm-hmm.
fill up, like Hot Slice in particular like has a lot of highs and a lot of mids. The lows are they're it's really high heavy, it's really mid heavy, and I really want to work on. Yeah.
Deeper
And I
bass,
think
deeper
I've
bass.
accomplished that with a couple of the songs that I have coming out, and they're definitely I think they just seem dark because they're just really bass heavy, but they they sound good, and they're just a lot more technical. And one of the things that I think I like about it is because it is technical, and like it might not be for everybody, but I think that the sound design fans are gonna like it, and so yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I'm the kind of analog, modular sound design. I love my Moogs. I have I always think a Moog can produce a bass that is
Yeah.
like really heavy. And so if you ever get your mother or Moog Mother 32, they can produce
Yeah, I
really
need to
heavy bass
definitely
lines.
look into that.
Yeah, those just the analog bass lines have a quality that if you record it right, they just can
Yeah,
like
I
fill
was
the
just
room.
about to say that. They can fill the room, it's just they just seem warmer, they just seem bigger, like not as hollow as
Yeah,
like some of the synths.
yeah. Well, digital can only go so far. The analog kind of fills the room with the
Right.
warmth of the signal. And like my Moogs are kind of like they're like guitars. I mean, they take 20 minutes to warm up. They
Oh
sound
wow.
different every day. So they give you different sounds just based on the way they're built. And they're hand built, so they don't behave like digital instruments. They behave more like
Yeah.
guitars. And so when you get into them, they just become like, you get kind of really drawn into it. Yeah, that's just me jumping on that. But I think they just provide for sound design. If you ever touch an analog synthesizer and you ever get it into your mix, I think you'll really enjoy what you can do with them in terms of the sound that you can bring in terms of leads. And that's just like monophonic synths. If you get into polyphonic, it's like Prophets or like old Jupiter 8s from back in the day when like Duran used to use Jupiter 8s. Like the Human League used Jupiter 8s, and they just have this sound that's like super warm compared to like a digital synth, like a Korg or something, just playing in digital. You hear like an old Jupiter 8 those are like from the 80s. They just have this warmth in their chords that you just can't get from digital. So yeah, just as a sound designer, when you get further into it, like the bringing polyphonic analog chords and leads and bass lines
I
is a
think
cool
analog
thing
is
to
definitely
do.
going to be my next step in getting more educated, because it's just, I think I was just using what was available to me, and what was available to me was Ableton and the plugins and the VSTs. And now that I mean, they're dope, but I mean, like, cool. It's definitely like the more, especially living in New York, there's access to studios that have all that analog gear. And so getting the opportunity to be able to go in, like, mess with those a little bit is going to be something that I am really excited for.
Yeah. Studio that has an old Model 55 or Model 33 or Mini Moogs, you would get like an unbelievable sound. Those are synths that like Keith Emerson and Genesis and bands like the old classic bands use, but they have this heaviness that yes used a lot of those, and they're sitting in some of the studios in New York. They still have them. They're like $30,000-$50,000 synthesizers. They're ones that take the whole
seen
wall.
It. There's this
like yeah. You seen it? You saw one?
I've seen one, but I mean, like, there's also a place in Austin, Texas, that has like one of the cooler modular synthesis walls that I've ever seen. It's called Switched On. If you ever make it to Austin, I definitely suggest, or if any of your listeners are in Austin, they'll know about Switched On. It is probably one of the coolest places to go mess around. And they also sell really exciting synthesizers. That's where I actually got my R3. I also have the Korg Volcas, the little guys.
Volcas are awesome.
I really like those. I have the
those
FM.
are
awesome. I have the drums. I have I have all of them but one.
The boutiques are pretty cool too.
I have, they're really cool.
They have like the Jupiters and the 106s and SH101s. They have a lot of cool stuff, and they're virtual analog, and they're pretty close, and they're small. And you can bring them. I've seen DJs actually have racks of those boutiques with like 808s and stuff, and you can do some pretty cool stuff with that.
Yeah, for sure. I know. That's like the closest thing that I've really gotten to is with those little Volcas, but I do like them quite a bit.
You can do a drum machine. Showed up at NAMM. That's really awesome. It's a very powerful machine. It's really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff from NAMM that's starting to pop up. I didn't get a chance to go this year, but there's a lot of like cool videos that are starting to pop up since it just got finished.
Yeah. NAMM had like their brand new Korg like polysynth, like the Minilog XD. That's a really nice small analog polysynth. Full analog synth, but it has a digital oscillator as well, so we can do digital and analog at the same time, which is kind of cool. And it's very small and it's portable. Yeah, there's all kinds of videos on it, but it's a really nice video, and it links with Volcas. It actually has a link to the Volcas, so you can link all your Volcas up to it.
That's so dope. That's really cool. Yeah, I mean, there's so many cool toys There's so much cool
Yeah.
shit out there.
Yeah, well, I'm a toy master, so
It's just one of those things. It's like you check your bank
I'll
account and you're like, what can I buy next?
equipment to see that you're doing a lot of cool work, and you got a new EP coming. You can let us know when that's out.
Absolutely.
And yeah, are you doing any new shows in the next couple of months?
No, I'm actually just working on my EP. I'm a lot of the times with electronic music producers, you get kind of stuck into just like playing parties or like playing nights at clubs, and it's not really about your music. It's just more or less like playing music, and I'm just trying to take a seat back from that and work on my actual music and production. So I'm just like laying low and making that EP.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I mean, last year I spent the whole year just creating a bunch of material, and this year I'm actually putting it out as like albums. But I spent the whole year just refining.
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, that's just so important.
Yeah. Well, it's good to actually get into your craft. So you're still in starting, and taking that time to actually learn your craft and work out records rather than just playing. There's a time to play. This year I'm hoping to do like concerts and festivals and stuff, but like last year was just like totally heads down, so I can get into that.
Yeah, and so there's definitely a time and place for both, I think. And I think that being able to get in the headspace and be able to get creating music, because sometimes you just have days where you work 8 hours a day, and when you're done with it, you're like, well, that was garbage. So to get good work done, you've got to like really take the good and the bad days, and most of the time you're gonna have bad days. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of bands, I was talking to a band that was like a traditional rock band, and they were from like London, from Manchester, and they did hours and hours of like rehearsals, and then out of those hours they pulled their album out of like 100 hours of rehearsals.
I mean, that's part of it.
That's kind of what it's kind of what you do.
I think people just think that you get in there and every single time you start making music that you're just like, oh, this is fire, this is amazing, and like most of the time you're just kind of like looking in the mirror afterwards like, I am garbage. And then
well, to build something that people don't realize how many hours you put down as a musician to get that hook. It might seem that it just came out of nowhere, and sometimes you get a hook.
Sometimes you sit down, you're on the train, and you open your computer, and all of a sudden, like 10 minutes later, you have an absolute banger. And those are days that I love. But most of the time, it's just like I'll find one thing out of the 8 hours that I like, and I think that's one thing that people need to realize is that it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that's unseen.
Oh yeah, I mean, musicians have all this stuff, in the archives. I'm a big music historian, and I watch documentaries like Eric Clapton, Dylan, Hendrix, Jimmy Page, and when you talk to these guys and people talk to them, they realize how many hours they spent working on something, and how many versions of something they did before you got the one that you thought was some kind of effortless. Some of this stuff was totally not effortless at all. It took like forever to like create something.
I mean, I have tracks sitting on my computer that I haven't trashed yet. I haven't labeled them as trash, but they're definitely still on there. And like every time I open up that project file, I'm just like, this is a nightmare, but there's something about it that I like, and eventually I'll turn it into a song.
Yeah, because you can take, sometimes I end up going through hours or something, and I take a year ago. I never had anything for it, and then I started to like rework it, add bass lines, and so you go into your repository, all your stuff, and sometimes you can go back and you pick something up you dropped, and you can bring something out. You never know.
For sure. There's always an element, and that's another thing too, is I think people like to hold on to like that idea that they had for a song. And then sometimes you just have to like eliminate that and then pull the parts that you like and then make a new song out of that.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's tons of examples. I was listening to like the Stones, and I was listening to some of their classic songs from Exile on Main Street. And it was like this big compilation, and it had some of their original demos. And they were like, like 180 degrees away from the final, you know, and you're like, wow, it's like that wasn't as effortless as the Stones kind of sound like they're effortless, you know, they just go and they just do it. And you actually saw how much work they did to actually bring these songs
it
out.
takes a lot of work for sure, but I mean, it's worth it. You know, that's also another thing is that you have to just like keep having fun, because it is a lot of hours spent just messing around, you know, and if you're not having fun doing it, then it's going to suck.
Well, I think a lot of because you love it more than that you make the money for the amount of hours you work.
Yeah.
If musicians got paid for the amount of hours they work on what they do, you know, they'd be sitting in, you know, in a big like palace. But you just not everybody gets to that. You know, like everybody's like working. Love it. You do it because you feel it and you want to bring your vision to the world, whether it makes a lot of money or not. You kind of just are feeling something you feel like the world should hear it, so you work on
that's pretty much what I do. I just try to keep having fun, and and once I stop having fun, I guess I'll quit, but I haven't gotten there yet. You know, I love making music. I love, you know, I love the feeling when something finally clicks together, you know, that's what's so worth it, you know, and I don't think that you would get that feeling unless you just labored so hard to achieve that.
Live playing. I've played in New York a couple of times, and Boston, and when I go to do a live show, it's just like the interaction with the audience, you know, just seeing somebody like really vibing off of something you write is like, there's nothing like that. It's hard to explain to people what that feels like if they don't do it, you know. It's hard to explain that feeling, but that's why a lot of musicians that, you know, drive for it is that kind of the feeling you get back from the interaction with the audience.
That's worth everything, you know? To be honest. Like that's just like watching that, and like just getting those like little emails or getting like little direct messages or just something that's like, yo, I really like your shit. I play it every day, or like they just tell you something personal about themselves and how much they like your music, and that's just so rewarding.
Yeah, it's cool when other musicians and producers like say they're vibing off your stuff.
That's like when I run around my apartment, I'm like, you will not believe who just said they like my music. And it's, you know, it's little stuff. I think that there's just so much about being a musician that's worth it, and that's fun, you know.
Yeah, or even collabing with people as you get further down the line. You know, I did some collabs with a band, a band called Lonnie Claire out of New York, and did a collab with this artist, an electronic musician from Los Angeles. And it was just really, you know, cool when we actually locked in on something. Like if you play with a musician and the other musician comes up with something, you know, you have an idea, you're working 50-50 on it, and they lock in on a bass line or they lock in on a groove, and you're like, wow, that really works. And then you have this kind of synergy you don't really have anywhere else. You know, it's an artistic, when you're working with somebody and you both have like the same kind of ideas and or things that are kind of, maybe even I had the same ideas, but they're complementing each other. You know, that is a really awesome feeling that, you know, a lot of bands have.
And I've only collabed with a few people. I have some collaborations in the works. I just have to, you know, just get on them. But that is a really interesting perspective that you bring up, because it's like a lot of people in bands are constantly collaborating, and like with electronic musicians, you're just pretty much by yourself. And so once you do collab with someone, and once you do vibe with someone, and like you can like pass on a track over to somebody and they work on it and then you get it back, it's just like crazy, you know, what other people can think of, you know, that you haven't thought of.
Yeah, like I had this like 3-month project I did with this artist named All Control K, and we'd have meetings. You know, we actually went and had Skypes, and we would send files back and forth and get real time, like you know, feelings on what we were doing. And then sometimes I was like, "Wow, Kay, you just did something unbelievable."
Yeah, that's like the best feeling.
We're doing like a real time collab. We were with the Skype and working in our studios, and can we kind of go back and forth the same night and not waiting until like a week later or a day later. And so it felt kind of like we were in the studio, even though we were on the net. because today you
Yeah,
can kind of do
that's
that.
one
And
thing that I would like for someone to invent is to be able to be inside a project file, like especially like Ableton Live, and be able to have somebody
yeah,
else in their DAW working on like almost like a Google Doc, but uh for Ableton, like that would be a game changer.
yeah, I was actually pushing that a couple of years ago. I had a podcast and I was talking to this producer guy named Rock Tunes, and we were put. I'm able to have a live capability you just talked about because I'm a programmer and it's totally possible to build something like that, but they
Oh,
just haven't
that's so annoying.
done it. I would think within the next 5 years, somebody, one of those companies is going to realize there are a lot of people doing these collabs. And if they built an online version of their studio that had real-time interaction, that it would actually help the music industry because you get a lot of people working on things
Yeah,
in
because it's
real
such a
time
pain
that I
in the
think
ass
can
having to
really,
like stem something out or, send it. Or like if I mean, it's just I work with a lot of people too that work in like FL Studio, and so to, flatten everything and put everything into stems and to send over, it's just especially when you have so much automation and like 43 channels open,
yeah,
it gets pretty crazy.
yeah, it just takes too long. And,
Yeah.
if you want to
Like
have that kind of real time
I want to be able to
vibe
have
that,
like my phone open and like be able to Skype someone and also see what they're doing, in the DAW.
yeah, we were kind of doing it by just like sending it through our through our systems like in real time. Alternative ways of doing it. System that
Yeah.
does it, so we found other ways to do it. But yeah, I mean, it can be done, but you have to do all these different tools. They're not
Yeah,
inside the studio,
yeah.
system.
It's
They're
not
not.
integrated into like a streamlined process yet, which I'm really excited for that to happen,
Yeah.
and I'll just complain about it until it happens.
Yeah, I think that's totally cool because I mean, the only other way you do that, you physically meet at a studio and you work on stuff. That's cool,
Yeah.
and still there's a place for doing that. But today, with so much capability, being able to do it on your phone or your laptop,
That would be an
that I think that'll be a
absolute
game
game
changer
changer.
for a
Yeah,
lot of
especially
artists.
because you don't have to essentially be in the same city. I mean, like, it's definitely people do it. Like, people get around it, and I think that the music industry is still going forward. But it would definitely make it. I mean, I'm a millennial, so anything that makes my life easier is going to be a super one up.
Oh yeah, I can get that. 'Cause, I mean, I've run into people that they did a whole
Damn.
album on GarageBand,
Damn.
you know, on an iPad, and they're doing pretty good with it. And I'm like,
Yeah, I
okay,
mean,
that's
there's so
pretty
many
cool.
cool like little
So the
iPhone
thing,
apps too. Like, there's so much shit that you can make music with. It's insane, and I love it.
yeah, and it kind of depends on the creativity. If you look at a guy like Jack White, he can take like a plastic $100 guitar and make like $1 million a million seller off an instrument that's not like the best instrument in the world. He uses like bad guitars on purpose just to show that he can, if you know how to play, you can take anything and just make it
Yeah.
sing. And he kind of purposely takes kind of substandard gear to show what you can do with it. And that's kind of cool. But it shows that you can do all kinds of things. You can take a Casio from like 1980 and do something on it. And people don't, what's that? He's like, what's a Casio? But like, if you're creative with it, you can do anything. So you don't have to have the most expensive synthesizer in the world. You could take something that a toy,
and
and actually, if
that's
you're
definitely
musical,
something I
you
like
can do
about
anything.
producing electronic music is that you don't have to have a shit ton of hardware. Like, you can have just a laptop and Ableton and like a few VSTs, and it's all up to your creativity. It's all up to what you've got going on in your head, and that's one thing that I do like about being an electronic music producer, is that like you can instantaneously make art without having to buy a bunch of shit. I mean, it's still expensive. Ableton isn't the cheapest, DAW out there, but it's definitely a lot cheaper than building out like a full studio in order just to figure out if you even like making music or if you're good at it.
Oh yeah, I think you like from Ableton as you get bigger and as you start to profit from your music, then that where you're the more just to get them. But yeah, within that tool set, you can do so much that it's a really good equalizer for people. You know, they can't afford $4,000 guitars and
Yeah.
five
I mean,
thousand
and
dollars
even like
synthesizers.
some
You
of the
know,
VSTs that are on Ableton, like if if you were to buy something to make that as a hard or as an analog or as like a hardware, it would just be so ridiculously expensive when you can just like buy something for like, $100 or $200 and like keep it on your computer forever and ever.
yeah, there's a case for that. Yeah, but like I said, like I understand
Oh
that because
no, but I know
I'm
so
kind of
many
an old
people that
school
are,
guy.
I mean, it's there's a beauty to both for sure. And that's the cool thing, like you were saying, like every day, like your analog gear behaves differently. It takes a while to warm up. Like it has some sort of like lifelike quality to it that I think people really enjoy. And the more I
Yes.
get into music and the more I progress, I really hope to experience that and to get more experience with analog gear, because it seems like it's a feeling that is a little irreplaceable.
Yeah, I think as an electronic musician, if you get your hands on a Moog
Mm-hmm.
Grandmother or a Model D or any of the Moogs, they have so much character that once you touch one and you actually realize that it's almost endless the sounds you can get out of them. You can just do so many combinations of structures of how you build the
Mm-hmm.
sounds on those things that you never
Yeah,
run out of
absolutely.
ideas. And that in itself kind of drives. Sometimes my Moog will drive something because I just come up with something. I just let it kind of talk to me, and then you kind of vibe off of it, and then you come up with an idea because it is kind of like a
Yeah.
living thing. They're strange in that way, and you wire it a different way because you have to actually wire them up with different combinations of controlled voltage wires. They look like an old telegraph
Yeah.
operator, but that allows you to come up
Yeah,
with so much
absolutely.
variation. That variation in itself it's like analog sequencing, which and you can drive you to go into a DAW and add something on. So I like combining like DAWs with analog, and then you can get lots of cool,
Oh
happy
yeah.
accidents.
I love a good happy accident. I've had a couple of those where I've been like, okay, that's working.
Yeah, I think that the analog can drive a lot of happy accidents. Um, and then then the more structured stuff in the DAW where you can tighten things up and actually really control what you want. So having both is a really good like marriage in terms of music, because then you can have the structure you want with the DAW and then the variability you want with analog. So I'm a big proponent of both of them because there's a
Yeah,
lot of cool
totally.
capability. you know there's the different tools for different things, and so yeah, you kind of just like open your mind to everything, and then the physical instruments like real guitars and stuff like that, those are also even physical percussion, because I talked to a percussionist. I was talking to a drummer, and he had like a
Woo.
$15,000 drum set, like very down on how many people were using drum machines and not call them as much as they used to get calls. But it's like people don't have time to bring a guy with a big drum set into their environment as much as they can jump on an 808 or a Volca drum machine or a DAW drum
Yeah,
machine and
yeah.
come up with their own beat. But there's still places, because if you perform a real drummer. But yeah, that's a cost and an expense, and so there's all these things with progress. It's hard, to stay, where you were in 1985 with your drum set, and it's 2019. You're not getting
Yeah.
as much work as you did back then. Um, but that's the way the world goes. It
I know.
changes.
I mean, it's already changed so fast in like the last like 5 years. It's just crazy, the flows of patterns of like what's popular and what's not, or like what's, new and what's not. And it's just why it's wild how fast everything is just going.
Well, like rock, rock was like, if you went to a show at a club, it was always like a heavy metal, Zeppelin, Leonard Skinner type of rock band.
Right.
And you're, electronic trance, whatnot, and they're not Def Leppard clones or, Guns N' Roses or Led Zeppelin clones. Is like, that's not what's going on. Like rock is not as big as it was. There are different types of
now
rock.
it's more like, I mean, it depends. Yeah, there's just
different.
so much out there, especially
Depending on where you are.
Yeah. I mean, I could go someplace and probably see someone butt naked ringing a triangle and consider that music. So.
Yeah, well, music where you are in New York is
yeah.
wide open. That's why I love New York. You can go see Coltrane on one part of town, and go see a punk rock band on the other side of town, and see some hip hop and EDM. I mean, so many different things going on. You get a real country, like somebody being like Johnny Cash or something. You never know. There's so much. It's awesome.
Yeah, I love it. I love everything about the industry.
Actually, we're the cutting edge up synthwave. That's where a lot of stuff is going on. An old folks want to listen to Dylan.
You're not an old fogey.
I'll tell you.
I mean, you know more about gear than I do, so I would consider you an expert rather than a fogey.
Yeah, some people think it's like passe. You see an analog synth, you don't need that dinosaur.
It's definitely like not my expertise, and I make music in such a different way. But that's like the cool part of talking to someone like you, is that you can have these discussions about the differences, and they're definitely different, but they all bring something to the table.
Yeah, well, anybody that takes the time to let me hear their ideas as an artist, you're actually doing your own thing. I love that. That's why, for the last interview around the globe. And last week I interviewed, bands from Italy and London. And it's really cool to hear what's going on. Interviewed bands from like Sweden and the Netherlands, and there's just a lot of cool stuff going on musically. And I just like to get my pulse on it, because as an artist, like doing these interviews, I take the time to do it away from my own music, just because communicating with other artists is a big thing to be able to progress, and to get new ideas. And so I decided this was a good way to kind of still be in the same game, but it's a different aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed talking to you today. This is going to go out on Spotify and Apple and Stitcher and like 11 to 12 other platforms once I get it set up. And I'll put the link to your Spotify. And the link will work on Apple, and it will work on Radio Public. For some reason, it doesn't work on Spotify. It doesn't let our links be active, but you can see them and cut and paste them into a browser. So the link, to your Spotify will be there, but it won't be able to be clickable. But Apple will. So if you want to push people to be able to click those and maybe push those.
Absolutely.
We'll send you those links when they're up, and they'll be up later tonight within.
Okay, cool.
We're always here to talk to indie artists. When you have your next EP ready,
cool.
Give us a little message and we can talk to you about it. We can do like a release episode,
which we've done
for some people we've talked to. Yeah, so thank you for being on the show. It's Teddy from New York, Brooklyn.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Right.
All right.